best news website or mobile service at this year's Digital Media Awards. The judges were impressed with the mobile-first design, commenting that the forward-thinking approach should be a standard for the industry. And the attention to detail in terms of innovation makes the CMA offering stand out. Log on and download now. Our time on Earth is short, but our impact will be felt for generations to come. The time is now to change the way we live.
I'm a chef on a mission to cut out food waste in your kitchen.
To meet our needs and the needs of the future. Join us on this mission to make sustainability a part of our lives. Every Friday, exclusively on CMA. World Tonight, daily on CMA.
Welcome back. Updating this hour's top stories. Rare show of public anger. Unprecedented protests spread across China for a third straight day as frustration grows over President Xi Jinping's COVID-19 curbs. The world watching and reacting to the China protests. A top U.S. health official urging Beijing to change course and drop its zero-COVID approach, deeming it impractical. And a show of support for Malaysia's Prime Minister as Barisan Nasional says it will back Anwar Ibrahim in next month's vote of confidence. Attention now turns to who Mr. Anwar will pick to join his cabinet. Well, circling back to our top story this morning, anger is on the rise in China over its unrelenting zero-COVID policy. Hundreds of people across the country have taken to the streets to protest against new curbs. Many are frustrated by a lack of easing, having endured lockdowns and other stiff rules for more than 2 years. And some demonstrations have turned political, with calls for a leadership change. This happening a little more than a month after President Xi Jinping secured his unprecedented third term. Well, for more analysis, let's bring in Dr. Chong Jia-yen, Associate Professor of the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore. Good morning, Dr. Chong. Protests in China are actually not unusual, right? Citizens have expressed discontent about everything from property to migrant labor in the past. But here we are into day 3. What playbook are authorities going by, and why are they letting these crowds continue to protest?
So I think the authorities recognize that there's a lot of frustration that's been building up to a boiling point. The deaths and the COVID lockdown of 10 people in Xinjiang was what really sparked and tipped people over the edge. There's been a lot of anxiety. There's been a lot of unhappiness over the disruption to lives and livelihoods because of the strict COVID zero policy. So I think one thing the authorities are probably hoping is that the energy will peter out. And I think why they are taking a slightly looser sort of approach is they're taking a leaf from what they previously done. They let the protests sort of peter out a bit before they clamp down. This is what they've done in various localized protests that you had mentioned earlier. However, what is a bit different this time around is the protests are springing up on the same issue across different cities all over China.
When you hear Chinese people speak about their situation, it's not hard to understand why they're angry. These restrictions Washington has called unrealistic. What was President Xi's goal when he implemented it in the first place? And do you think these curbs are actually about control and propaganda or the science of the virus?
So I think when the restrictions first came in, they were at a very different stage of the pandemic. We didn't know as much. The vaccines hadn't fully come out yet. So there was a very, very different stage. And as the Chinese versions of their vaccines have come online, we know that they are effective, maybe not as effective as the mRNA ones, but they offer some protection. There's been some effort to push this through. The vaccination rates are pretty high, but I think among vulnerable groups, probably still not high enough. There may be some worries that the less effective vaccines plus China's own limits on their hospital beds and other medical resources might really put too much pressure on the system. So that was some of the earlier consideration. Now, of course, there's the question of, well, why don't they let in mRNA vaccines? There's been some dispute over the intellectual property of getting this in. And I think what really complicates issues is that Xi Jinping himself has attached, right, this zero COVID policy to his own legacy, which means to say that anything that goes wrong will be attached to him. So he has to make sure that it goes right. The CCP has an incentive to make sure everything looks right and doesn't go wrong. Otherwise, there could be some potential backlash that they may face, both on the streets, as we're seeing, but potentially within the party as well.
Let's talk about the social media angle of this. Social media has been awash with videos showing the country's stringent measures every day. People posting authorities spraying individuals with disinfectant, for example. Even though Weibo is controlled in China, what role do you think it has played in this recent unrest?
So Weibo is, very widespread in China. There's a lot of control, but what we also know is that a lot of the controls seem to be manual. The PRC system hires many people to actually go through and delete posts and figure out what should be on there, what shouldn't. So it's very labor intensive. Of course, China has a lot of people, but this makes things a little bit slower, makes coordination a little bit difficult, especially when many localities are having various kinds of issues. Plus, the issue with Weibo and other Chinese social media is that the way that the PRC state has been trying to get people to come under more surveillance has been to put them on these sorts of systems. Well, the issue is then you put people on the systems that are reliant on them for all kinds of things, including news, and you're not censoring fast enough. News has to get around, about how to go around and work with COVID restrictions, so on and so forth. So the social media element, while it's a tool of control, it also allows a channel for more information to go out, for some of the challenges to more authoritative voices to come about.
And some observers are arguing China is caught in its own trap. So how do you think the country is going to roll back or maybe shift to a more moderate strategy without appearing to lose face, as some say? Or as you mentioned, President Xi is has linked his legacy to this zero COVID policy. So what options does he have?
So I suppose the smoothest way is to let the protest peter out a bit, come in with more control in terms of the protest. But then while you're doing that, ease some of the COVID restrictions in practice, even if not in name. And then after a while, you can move away from those stricter restrictions, claim it's a victory and you're at a different stage of the pandemic, and move ahead. And while in the meantime, that sort of period of that you get, you use it to boost vaccinations, you use it to boost up your medical facilities in the hope that the spikes in infections won't be that serious. I mean, many places that have lifted restrictions, we've seen big spikes. So I think that's one of the things the Chinese authorities would be concerned about.
And before we let you go, Dr. Chong, President Xi, of course, recently cemented his power and his place in history. And our correspondent earlier said that these demonstrations may actually take away from the facade of absolute power that he wields. What do you think?
So State Chairman Xi has pretty much consolidated his position within the party, but China is a vast country, and there are many people. And control, sometimes people forget, is also costly. It takes people to go around and make sure citizens are following the COVID restrictions. It takes lots of police to try to put down lots of these protests. So these costs, right, they have to be measured and brought under control. So even if Xi does not face challenge within the party, these sorts of simultaneous protests all across the country does put some strain on the system. That's where it's a bit different from previous protests, which are more sporadic. They're less coordinated. There doesn't seem to be organization this time around, but certainly, they are very widespread.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for your time this morning. That was Dr. Chong Jia-Yan, Associate Professor of the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore.